Hold on 1 second. Just before you skip forward, and I know you're gonna skip forward, before you do, to check out where your class lands on this tier list, please watch the beginning of the video so you can understand the parameters of why it's important that I put that class in that position. Some things in particular that you might find interesting are where I put Frost Death Knights, and that was kind of thinking about where it's gonna be later on in the phase. But I do talk about where it will be early on in the phase, which is way higher than it will be later on in the phase. So just know before you kind of flame or get upset or get excited, any of those things, it is important to know why I talk about how each of the classes is actually going into that position, as well as the beginning of the video where I obviously talk about what we're really using as the parameters to establish this tier list. And lastly, before we dive in, thanks for watching, guys. Enjoy the tier list. Good luck getting all of your loot. It's gonna be crazy contested for casters especially. And also I do wanna say, if you wanna join the channel memberships, you can, which just helps support the channel, and also exclusive as well as early releases are gonna be there. So enjoy. The parameters of a tier list are so important for Ulduar because we no longer sit in what's just a patchwork simulation anymore. Every fight isn't just sit here and DPS down the boss, right? That's not the same thing. A lot of bosses have multiple things, like bosses have buffs they give you with which buff different classes a lot more than other classes. If we're looking at like a Hodir tier list and your Fire Mage is just shitting on everyone and your Warlock is shitting on everyone, right? There's a lot of fights that have a lot of cleave. There's a lot of fights where you have to hold off on DPS until the next phase. We're thinking more on general overall for Ulduar, not in a patchwork simulation where it's just a pure DPS thing. Also, some things that help out some of the classes would be their mitigation, which helps out more early on, but less late phase. But you can avoid some mechanics by just fainting as a rogue, right? Before we even do everything else, let's just throw one S tier class in there, because everyone knows already at this point that this is kind of the class that, now that Unholy DK's got nerfed, this class has the highest stonks in all of Ulduar. It is just, you can't really dispute it. It's realistically, there's no way of being like, this class is not that good. They are. You're gonna stack them ridiculously. Unfortunately, it's a fact. They're not necessarily the highest single target DPS in the end of the phase, but early on, they're gonna probably carry a lot of the raids, and later they're gonna carry a lot of the raids. The biggest flaw of a Affliction Warlock is specifically that their Bislis is like 90%. It's like 60% Algalon loot, and it's all 25-man hard mode loot. Like if we look at just really quick, ignore this first page. Ignore this first page because it's not adjusted now that Unholy got giga nerfed to the ground. So ignore that, right? If we look at like a Warlock's Bislis, and this is actually has been changed now, so it's slightly different. But if you look at this Bislis, right, you're just like like you need 252 loot for everything. Everything is 252 loot. Like everything is 252 loot. And that's just, I think people should really understand that a lot of tier gear is like a close alternative, right? Tier gear can be a close alternative, right? You have two pieces of tier, right? But like it's like 252, Algalon 252, Algalon 252, Flame Leviathan 252, which is actually gonna be one of the hard modes a lot of guilds probably should skip week one. Algalon, or I mean, at least luckily this is Algalon 10-man, which is actually really hard as well. Mimiron 252. There we go. There we go. But I don't think Scale of Fates is actually your Abyss anymore. I think that's wrong. So Sarthe Edge, okay, Algalon 252, 252, Freya 245, easy clap. Just go grab it. Okay. So realistically, one thing to note for all casters is that your gear is stupid contested a lot more than anything else. But what it is that the best class probably next phase, realistically, is going to be Warlocks. Warlocks are sitting in a beautiful place. They have a lot of DPS, a lot of utility. You have a lot of HP, so you don't die. You can do damage while moving at times. You can burst during burst windows, and you can kill bosses in execute phases, which is actually very crucial because there's timings to kill some of the hard mode bosses for sure. And like being able to push past that like last 10% is actually the hardest part on a lot of the fights. So Warlock Song's looking really good. On that note, I guess you could say Demonology Song's also really fucking high. Demonology is looking phenomenal as well. And if you're the demo lock, you might have a case. You might technically have a case to say I should slurp all the loot first because it buffs the rest of the raid. That's more of a case in I would say more hardcore-ish guilds where they do something like that. I think your average guild doesn't necessarily do that sort of like a loot proud to your demo lock because it feels like other people are getting skipped out on loot. But again, I would suggest that everybody focuses on getting like tier gear. Tier gear can be like relatively free, and it's within like 2 to 3% for most classes of your full base. Okay. All right, warriors. Should I just skip to warrior? Blood DK, surprisingly good. Surprisingly good. Sometimes you can do like 10k DPS. Don't run Blood DK. All memes aside, don't run Blood DK. Let's get this one out of the way now, guys. Every tier list in the world, for some reason, for phase 2, has Ret Paladin on like the high B tier. I'm sorry, Ret Paladin. There is now a precedent for classes being changed. There is a precedent for classes literally being changed at their core. There is, as of this last weekend. So maybe there's hope, but there was also, Agran literally said that they don't want to change Ret Paladin because that's the way Ret Paladin has always been. And, well, not really always been, but also like they don't want to change classes. So Ret Paladin sits pretty low. And you're going to be that way until basically ICC, where you get 2-piece tier 10, which gives you free spin to win on your Divine Storm, or and you kind of jump up to like maybe like mid A tier. You're not going to be S tier ever. And if you are waiting until ICC to get Shadowmourne and become S tier, let's just drop it right now. You're not going to be an S tier class. You are just so far below everyone else. It sucks, man. It does. Feral Druid is marked as S tier again on every single like phase 2 BIS list. Even like relatively new S tier, like people like last week that were doing BIS lists and or tier lists, and we were rating the tier list last week. Feral Druid is not S tier by any means. I guess you could make an argument for it to be in a low A tier. Not really. I don't really see a realistic way. Feral Druid, phenomenal because you bring them because they're an amazing off tank, right? Like you have your main tank and then you have your Feral that's like your main off tank. Feral is not sitting too pretty realistically. We can give them into the B tier. I think try to be like as fair as possible. A lot of classes are going to kind of go into the A tier, and they'll be like some are better in the A tier and some are worse, but Feral falls just shy of what I'm thinking about it realistically. If you're thinking about realistic DPS starting in the phase as well as how you fully gear in the phase, right? Because I want us to be thinking about like throughout the entire phase. Classes obviously get like way better towards the end of the phase, and that is a good segue to Mage. Mage in full BIS in a perfect fight is ridiculous. It is going to be the highest DPS output probably right now in full BIS. If we have like the current lengths of fights in full BIS next phase, they will be the highest DPS in single target, but that's like a rare fight that is the situation. It's not like the most stackable class. You can't bring a lot of them. They require a crazy amount of gear. They're phenomenal right now for certain fights, things like Hodir, like I mentioned earlier. Maybe even fights like they have a crazy burst, so they're looking great on XT hard mode. They're looking great on normal razor scale. When you get like a haste buff, I guess, on Ignis, but that's not like too ridiculous as it compares to like other classes. Mages are looking good. Mages are looking phenomenal. Yogg 0 mages are a fire mage, right? And for mage, actually, it's mostly going to be Frostfire. You're mostly going to be Frostfire if you're running fire. There's situations where you run Arcane. There's situations where you run fire. it would be good to have like a set for both and to know how to play both. I think the best mages are going to do that. Absolutely. I would rate both mages in the high A tier. At the very end of the phase, they bump into like S tier, but because this is looking at the overall of the next phase, mages are in the A tier. They're looking very good. They're looking very, very good next phase. So if you're a mage, realistically know that in full bis, which again is all 252 items, you are going to be destroying the meters. You're going to be destroying everyone. Marksman Hunter. Marksman Hunters aren't scaling nearly as well as we originally anticipated, or at least from what people suspected from private servers. There's this common fallacy that Marksman Hunter scales better with armor pen and then outscales survival. And it was kind of discovered that it's more with weapon damage. And now the weapons, Hunter weapons, have finally been buffed on the PTR. They were not buffed. You got the eye level buffs, but the DPS was never buffed. Now it is buffed. So Hunters are looking better than they were for late game in next phase, but survival is still stronger next phase. So Marksman Hunter, I don't really see a reason to run it, although unless there's like, there are some fights where you don't really like to trap weave, even though Marksman technically likes to trap weave. There are some fights that suck to trap weave. General of SX, you're not running into your melee, you'll get a shadow crash on the melee and wipe the raid. There's times, a lot of fight times on Yogg where you can trap a lot. XT's hitbox is kind of lame. Realistically, Marksman's down here. Survival Hunter actually looking really fucking good. Survival Hunter is looking really, really good. Maybe ahead of Fire Mage for now. Survival Hunter is looking phenomenal. Topping a lot of fights. A really good survival is topping a lot of fights. Currently on the meters, it looks that way also because you're trap weaving and there's a ton of like AoE that doesn't go towards your parse. Right? There's a ton of AoE right now that won't go towards your parse. So if you're looking at like damage meters versus like Warcraft logs, it'll look a little bit different. But even then, there's a lot of fights where survival is very strong. Survival Hunters are in a very good spot. And with your weapons being buffed, you're at a slightly better spot. It's not like ridiculous, but you're in a better spot. Fire Mage will surpass you. It will surpass you in the phase. That's just a realistic thing. But for like a general of the entire phase, you'll probably be sitting pretty juiced. Hunters are actually very, very like performing extremely well. They're performing extremely well. Similar vein, I honestly think most things are in the A tier. This is going to be kind of lame to say, but most things are realistically like kind of in the A tier. They're all close. You just don't stack any of them, right? If you're in the S tier, kind of brings you into this world where you're like more stackable. You are a leap ahead of the A tier, but yeah, Hunter gears very fast. Hunter gears ridiculously fast, which will also make it scale better early on or for most of the raid. Hunter can also, you can take your tier gear. Hunter can take tier gear like very easily. If you go into like Hunter gearing, you can take your tier gear, and can you guys see that? All right, cool. Your 4-set tier gear, super easy. Slurp it up really fast early on. 600 attack power from your steady shots. That's just juice. Like your tier gear relatively is pretty close to your full bis, and then you're not fighting like people for Embrace of the Gladiator yet. Boundless Gaze, fucking fighting people for that. Soul Devouring Cinch, fighting people for that. Dark Matter, you're not fighting that many people for it, but you are fighting people for it. Leggings of Cunning Deception, also fighting people. Like there's a lot of loot that's very contested, and you could be very quick to be like, I'll take tier gear, so then maybe I could get like the brand signet rings or something, right? Go for your tier gear if you're a Hunter. Then you're also going against like Shaman for tier gear if Shamans are going for tier gear, but like Protector tokens always seem like the freest. Frost Death Knight. Guilds are gonna run multiple Frost CKs as Alliance also for progression. Frost CK is sitting at like a very solid place. You can grab tier gear also on Frost CK. Your tier gear is very, very, very good. You have a very nice tier set bonus, but you have the exact same sigil. You're using your sigil that you have from phase 1 throughout the game. You have your BIS sigil. So Frost CK doesn't have like a necessary crazy scaling, but you should be able to gear relatively fast if you go for your tier gear. They sit pretty solid. Frost CKs have some pretty amazing burst cleave when they get procs rolling, so they can do really, really well in Ulduar. I don't want to put them in the... They haven't, like, Songs of Frosty haven't gone down, but haven't necessarily gone up with, like, Unholy getting nerfed, right? Frosty K is sitting in the A tier, very solid. You can bring multiple of them, which is something that you maybe even more of them than these classes. But on the DPS meters, you're probably very close, but you might see Hunters beating you. On a lot of the fights where the buffs are for mage, they're just destroying that fight anyways. So if you think overall throughout Ulduar, Frosty K sits at like a low A tier, realistically. Balanced Druid. Incredible class. There's places where you could have just like ridiculous bursts with good RNG. You scale decently. Boomkins are looking very strong. Your base lists all are saying you should get Valinir. Don't be that fucking guy. But kind of do be that guy like later on in the phase, because if you're thinking about being a Boomkin, you're probably like 85% chance, 90% chance you have to heal some fights in Ulduar. Let's be realistic. You need a healing off spec. Boomkin are great, but you are a healer also. Just know, realistically, now in Ulduar, if you're just like that person that's like, I just play Boomkin. Like, it's kind of a hack move, because there's some fights where you want like some like 6 heals, and a Resto Druid is phenomenal. But there's a lot of times where you don't want a Resto Druid, right? So if you're playing a Boomkin, no, you're gonna want to help out and heal most of the time. Boom Chicken, you have to heal. But you are looking very good. You are looking very good. You have consistent and very powerful AoE whenever they're necessary for AoE. Maybe you're gonna do your AoE and pull some extra stuff because you're that guy. That's like the standard Boomkin move. Don't be that guy. But your DPS is phenomenal. It's very consistent. You're gearing realistically relatively contested. If I were to pull up like the contestation list, but I don't know if I'm allowed to. I don't know if I'm allowed to show the list until Jordy does his video tomorrow. Boomkin are great. Boomkin are in the A tier. These are all relatively close. I think these two are kind of higher in the A tier than these ones. But Boomkin are doing phenomenal, right? But all casters fight for 252. Yeah, so, but like, yeah, all casters are sitting here in this world of like your loot just like is owning you. Your loot is just like absolutely owning you. All right, combat. Every tier list right now is putting combat in S tier. The top of A tier. Okay. There you go. Combat Rogue, phenomenal. There's cleave situations. There's fights where you get to do ridiculous damage. But, and you also, your weapons are amazing. It's easy to get your weapons relatively. You get armor penetration. A lot of things are really good. Combats are very, very powerful. I just don't think they make it into the S tier where you're like stacking combat rogues, right? In most situations, your assassination rogue will do more DPS. Combat do have phenomenal burst with their big CDs, where assassination is kind of like more of a consistent press 2 buttons type of build while doing really great damage. That is what it is. Combat, probably a lot more fun to play, and there's some fights where you'll do like way more and you'll be way more useful, but I don't think that brings you up into the S tier. You're not necessarily fully stackable. Maybe you bring 2 combat rogues if your guild decides for it. But rogues as a class, absolutely, definitely a stackable class. And that brings me to, obviously, assassination then is slightly better going into the S tier. Kind of near the back of the S tier. You're not doing as much damage as your warlocks right now. You don't have as much utility, but you do have more utility than most of the melee classes. You have that feint, you have Cloak of Shadows, you have vanish if you need to vanish out of something. There's a lot of fights where feint is like so phenomenal. Feint is so phenomenal. You can just ignore mechanics. Thorum hard mode, ignore mechanics. Thorum normal mode, ignore mechanics. Freya, ignore mechanics. Fucking Iron Council, ignore mechanics. Like, you just sit in there and keep DPSing. I know Feint is a single target DPS increase for you as well. Warriors, let's look at Warriors really fast. You beat Retribution Paladins. It's a hard, actually, that's an interesting thing to say. Arms is like C tier, realistically, right? Like, Arms is like C tier, but like it's not even on the same tier DPS wise as a Ret Paladin, but Ret Paladins bring a lot of utility to the raid. Like, you should have DSAC probably, which hurts you, but like you probably should have DSAC realistically, at least for like Algalon. So maybe have 2 ret specs where you can respec into your other ret spec, I guess. I don't know. Arms Warriors are sitting in a really low place. Fury's kind of like now middle of the pack-ish. There's some fights where Fury Warriors can do ridiculous. I think there's going to be a lot of places where like Alondo is going to showcase the power of Fury Warrior. It's like, I think you're going to see some fights where Fury Warriors do really well, but like 98% of the Fury Warriors you run a raid with are going to be like dog doo-doo. It's just a fact, dude. It's a fact. Every time you'll see like some people being able to pull off crazy DPS on a class, and then like everyone else you see play the class is absolutely god awful. Why is that? I don't know. But it's like a standard. It's like if you look back in TBC and you looked at like Hunter and you looked at a BM Hunter, a good melee weaving BM Hunter was destroying everyone. It wasn't even close. Nobody could get close to them. Maybe on a really long fight, warriors could like inch up to being relatively close. That was it. Or a scripting, cheating melee weaving Hunter. But if you ran a pug, your Hunter was probably doing like 9th on the DPS meters. Because it was like, what the fuck is this, dude? It's a similar situation for Warrior. Fury Warrior, I think, could do really well. I think you could see Fury Warriors doing more than your Ferals quite easily. Ferals, though, have consistent, really good like damage and consistent cleave, but also Ferals like is also like a bigger gap of skill. Fury, I want to put in the B tier. I would like to put it above Feral, but Feral is going to get butthurt. But if you put it behind Feral, Furies are going to get butthurt. There's a lot of fights Feral, yeah, can't shred. How are you going to get behind the boss? Positioning is huge. Fury's going high B tier. And I think there are fights where Fury obviously can like shoot up, right? You can go Kolagarn, play in the middle of Kolagarn and cleave all of it. I'm pretty sure on Mimron, if you're attacking the middle of Mimron, you can hit all 3 of them like consistently. So your damage it can be crazy on Mimron as well. You're getting like crazy crit buffs and haste buffs on Hodir. You can do phenomenal, and you have like infinite rage. Rage scaling with attack damage, you can do well on XT. Fury can do well. They need a lot of gear. They're contesting people for a lot of gear. It is what it is. Fury is an interesting one where it's very dependent on the class or the player. It's very dependent on the player where Fury's sitting, whereas something like Ret, it's not necessarily dependent on the player. Like you have a really good Ret Paladin, they're doing 4% more damage than a really shitty Ret Paladin, kind of, right? Like not really shitty, but like relative, right? So it's a big thing. Fury can gear really quickly with 4-piece. That helps them a lot, whereas early on you might see them doing a lot of really decent damage. I don't know. Realistically, if you're playing like a Frosty K and you're getting beat by your Fury Warrior, like figure it out. But I think there are like, unless your Fury Warrior is a god who could then just, there's some fights that can do really well. Frosty K, Fury Warrior, we're leaving it at B tier. It is what it is. Fury Warrior, we're leaving at B tier. Realistically, you could bring Frost up, but like, I think their damage is just like, it's just there, right? It's just like, it's easily stackable, but their damage is just there. Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest. Another class you actually usually bring just one of. A good Shadow Priest can take advantage of a lot of the buffs in Ulduar. There are a lot of buffs in Ulduar. I do not think Shadow Priest, which like Shadow Priest Bistless, a lot of times they're saying they should have Valinir. It's fucking stupid if anyone's ever said it, because Priest is like the only class that has lower prio than everything else on Valinir. So how would you get Valinir? Shadow Priest, I want to put at the bottom of A tier. They could actually, in a lot of fights, beat a lot of people. They could do phenomenally well, but on average, they're not going to be beating everybody else on the DPS meters. I even want to maybe bring Fire Mage back, but we'll leave it here for now. Shadow Priest, really good. Not a very stackable class. Maybe you bring 2. Most of them that you see aren't going to do phenomenal. Oh my god, I can't believe I had that sound effect on.
Please, no! No!
Shadow Priests bring a lot of utility to the raid, which is always really nice. Again, they're very strong. But on the A tier list, like all of these classes are so ridiculously close. Maybe except for like right here. Everything is just ridiculously close. Maybe I should have made like an A- tier or whatever. where I put everything else. But a lot of things are just gonna sit here in this A tier section. Enhanced Shaman. I've seen Enhanced Shamans do really well. Enhanced Shaman Stonks can be great. They have phenomenal cleave. I fucking knew someone like Psycho would come in here and mauled about the Fury being top of B tier. Enhanced Shaman is definitely in the A tier. I think it's very dependent on your Enhanced Shaman player being good at. Enhanced Shaman also needs to like coordinate with your tank on like placing totems also. So that's a big thing because movement sucks for Enhanced Shamans. If you didn't know, a lot of their damage is Fire Nova, which happens off of their totem, which they've already placed. And if their totem is a Fire Ellie that they've snapshotted, which also, if you look at like any of the like current DPS sim numbers, the Enhanced Shaman simulations, I'm pretty sure don't have snapshotting into Fire Elemental, which like means that their simulations are a lot lower than they should be. Maybe not a lot, but yeah, for a short fight, it's a huge CD, which doesn't reset on boss kills because Blizzard hates you, so suck it. Enhanced Shamans are looking very good. You could probably bring 2 of them to almost every raid. Realistically, if you're Alliance, the interesting thing is like I keep seeing Frosty K, and like if you're Alliance, you're probably bringing more Frosty Ks. Like your Frosty K is like up here in this situation if you're Alliance. But we're leaving Frosty K right here for now. Enhanced Shaman, that's hard. I don't know how to, that's hard. Why is Frost better on Alliance? It's the exact same on Alliance, and it's almost the exact same. It's just early on in Ulduar, like early Ulduar, Frosty K is just consistent damage and you don't have to like play around it. It's easy to perform well. Early Ulduar, Frosty K is probably sitting like right here. Early Ulduar, for most progression guilds, Frosty K is sitting right here. Okay? For most progression guilds, early Ulduar, Frosty K is sitting like right here. But we're thinking the entire phase, and Frosty K does not scale well. Frosty K does not scale super well comparatively. I just, these ones are all like so close. Like, it's just so interesting because early on in the phase, Frost really is like, it's hard to say because to do like a generalization for the entire phase, right? Like Frost just like starts like up here and then like will slowly whittle its way down. So Enhanced Shaman, we're giving you this spot. Another thing is, right, like you probably won't see that many mages in your raid, and you probably won't see that many fire mages, even Frostfire mages. And you, like you're definitely seeing shamans. You're definitely seeing an Enhanced Shaman. Like your raid is gonna bring an Enhanced Shaman, maybe bringing 2 Enhanced Shamans. Your raid might bring 2 Enhanced Shamans. It might. Destro Warlock, technically you could put him in like the bottom of A tier. I just don't, like, why? Like the thing about Destro Warlock is like, why? I feel like you're just doing it to do it. Your other specs are just better. Your other specs are just better. So like, I just don't, Destro Warlock is like a very solid, just like why though, right? It's just like there are niche situations where you like it. It's also gonna be really helpful on Freya. There's some bosses where like you'll see these insane numbers, right? It's gotta be, I think it's gotta be in the B tier for the sake of why, right? Damage wise, it's better than these classes. And there's gonna be someone who clips this screenshot and the Warlock Discord is like, this guy is an idiot. And I just wanna like leave it off of the list because it's like, just why, dude? Just who cares? Why? Why when you could just play the better specs? What is the point? Okay? That's it, okay? The point is you want to be edgy and have fun, right? It's like playing BM Hunter. I put BM Hunter, technically you could play BM Hunter and do more damage than these guys, but why? Now, Warriors where it is because we gave it the right justification. You have to watch that part about why Warriors where it is. Let's look at it. Okay, Ellie Shaman. Okay. Also, just for reference, a lot of people, let me just go to Warcraft Logs. A lot of people are basing tier lists off of, let me go to boss damage. People are going to like, people are basing tier lists for phase 2, like purely off of this, right? Purely off of like these, which just is like all percentiles. Let's look at like even like 99th percentile. People are basing tier lists, and it's so bait. It's so bait because the classes scale so differently. These classes, all casters have a phenomenal amount of contested loot. Unholy DK is obviously getting nerfed, but even in the 99th percentile, like Unholy DK right now are just like, you can't base anything off of Unholy DK's max percentile. because it's literally impossible. That rate is 27 unholy DKs, so it doesn't matter. Why would you adjust it? So like basing it completely off of like phase one is not fair, right? You have to look at like how things do simulate in how things do look from their gear upgrades, but also like the fights. And we talked about like how we were justifying everything earlier, but like a lot of the fights aren't sit there and tank and spank, right? All right, Destro, sit there in your Y spec. Elemental Shaman, another class where it's like you can bring it. You can go Elemental Shaman. Realistically, it should be early on beating out right here, right? Early on. Most elite BIS lists are also giving you Valinir, which isn't technically something that's impossible to get because Shamans are like pretty good with Valinir. It's a hard justification. I would say for myself, it's hard. I've seen logs of elite Shamans and I've seen their sims, but I haven't necessarily myself seen really good ones. Playing. They have pretty good cleave, right? Like every time they can use chain lightning. It's hard. I want to say I don't have an accurate estimation, and that's just me being honest, like purely honest. I don't have some like I can't justify a realistic placement for it that I think is absolutely correct, right? It'd be like more of hearsay. Right? It could be top of B, bottom of A is where I would guess or where I would place it. But again, I don't have a perfect place for it. So like, I'm just going to leave it off. So here, guys, let's talk about the gargoyle in the room. Let's talk about the gargoyle in the room. Let's talk about what used to be the Giga Chad specs of all Giga Chad specs, but has been nerfed to oblivion. If you want to see a good estimation of the DPS losses we have, then pull up. Let's see. Let me go to White Wolf's channel. Our boy White Wolf. Okay, if you want to see good explanation, go watch this video. Oh no, this is the video with me in it. Let's watch his newest video. Not with me. Watch this video. Your opener fully changes. So, Unholy Death Knights, your BIS list doesn't really change other than you're for sure looking at like Void Saber instead of 2 Crest of Insanities, and you're using Mark of Norganon probably because guess what, guys? Comet's Trail is no longer your prio. It was already, but it is not. But how much DPS are we losing? Here are the numbers, right? If you don't know and you lived under a rock, Unholy DKs no longer snapshot Gargoyle. Gargoyle is now dynamic on every cast of its actual, whatever, Gargoyle strike shit. Okay. Most fights are long right now, which means your Gargoyle wasn't doing all of your damage anyways. Gargoyles are the Giga Chad of the game in a very short fight. In a very short fight, Gargoyles are the things that destroy it and pump for everyone. Bloodlust early, Gargoyle do all the damage, sit back and enjoy. That's no longer the case, obviously. But there's some fights, some hard modes where you might even get 2 Gargoyles. Most likely it's more like Mimiron, maybe Yogg-Yoggoron. In a good guild, you shouldn't get two Gargoyles realistically for Iron Council, other than maybe like the first like 2 or 3 weeks. And now it's actually better to be able to double Gargoyle with Iron Council because your second one will be with Bloodlust on the last boss. But most guilds, hard mode Iron Council, you're not going to even get to, not most guilds, top guilds, you're not going to get two Garys. Unholy DK took a bit of a hit. They were going to be the top DPS class next phase for most fights, but there's other fights where you would obviously be losing out to mages or warlocks for sure, because there's just like better buffs for mages and warlocks. This raid isn't a raid that's purely optimized for an Unholy DK, but how bad was the nerf? I expected the nerf to be a lot worse than it is. I expected the nerf to nerf our class to oblivion. I made a YouTube video saying, this is the biggest nerf anyone's ever seen. And that's not wrong. It is. It's the biggest nerf to a class we've ever seen in Classic. Your gargoyles are doing about 80% of the damage they were doing with like a perfect situation, but like it's no longer worth it to even get black magic up. It's quite literally not worth it to lose out on the melee swings to get black magic. It's one cast of your gargoyle. Unholy Decay are still looking pretty good. It's either low S tier or high A tier. Unholy Decay is actually not lost out on being phenomenal. You'll bring early on, maybe not too many, but they're looking pretty solid right now. If you look at any of the guilds that ran testing with good Unholy Decays, they were top on a lot of the fights. Unholy Decays bring a shit ton of consistent cleave, which is stupid. Right now, that also looks better than it does on the logs. Logs wise, it doesn't look as good for most of the fights, but like, they're very solid. You love Unholy Decays on a lot of the fights. They also can double dip on some of the fights if you're looking at something like Hodir and your gargoyle being summoned while you're inside of like the beam and the gargoyle's in the beam and you're like, we're all beamed up, Scotty. They still do have very good burst, but your gargoyle is now doing like 140k damage if you have a good gargoyle, whereas a good gargoyle is doing like 260k damage. That's a really good, yeah. So your gargoyle, you take like 100,000 damage out of like your 3-minute fight situation. You're not getting 2 Garys. Unholy Decays, I want to give them high or low S tier. It might be A tier. If you were on Alliance, I would give you high A tier, maybe right here even. But if you're Horde, I'll give you low S tier. Unholy Decays are still actually looking good. You can bring multiple of them to the raid still. That is an interesting difference. If you're Alliance and Horde, it still is a big difference. You do get now Orc is slightly better than Troll. Any toe enjoyers can now re-roll. I saw a YouTube video that said that it has confirmed that we will see faction and race change for next phase. That was a bait YouTube video. Don't like those guys' YouTube videos that say stuff like that because that's not true. That hasn't been confirmed. Unholy Decay, still actually pretty good. Still actually pretty good. Still actually phenomenally good. It's very consistent damage throughout the entire fight, always. Overall, you're not losing that much of your DPS. You're losing something like, I think it's 3 to 5% of your DPS now, which actually ends up being a lot because your DPS is so high. You're probably gonna sit right here for a while, but you can just go for tier gear. Go for tier gear early on. You're not looking at getting, if I go to like a BIS list, right? If we look at like phase 2, goodbye Crest of Insanity now, because obviously expertise, because you're running Mark of Norganon instead of Comet's Trail. You just don't get Comet's Trail. You don't have prio on Comet's Trail. It's your BIS item. It still is, but you're not getting it. Like, let's be realistic. Rogues rejoice. Whoever else, Ret Paladins rejoice. You can get Comet's Trail. You're having Mark of Norganon, which is a huge item that's very contested. So now you can kind of justify yourself getting some of the other pieces, right? Like, give me plated leggings or give me Warhelm, right? So there's that. A lot of items are contested, but not nearly as bad as if you're looking at something like a caster. So you should be able to scale up pretty fast, pretty easily. You can also take your tier gear. You can take your tier gear early on, and I would suggest a lot of people doing it. If we were looking at early phase for like Alliance, you might actually see something like this. Early phase for Alliance, this would be like more of an accurate situation. But if we're looking at like full end phase, and overall, a lot of the Unholy Decays are Horde anyways. So I think this is an accurate estimation. Again, Destro Warlocks, why? They're great. They could edge into A tier, but why? And Ellie Shaman, I personally don't have enough information. I haven't seen enough logs. The simulations, I don't believe, are perfect, and I haven't seen enough really solid people playing the spec to give an argument for or against. But I believe they would be like right here, right? Yeah. So I bet. So it is, this is what is going to be an accurate estimation of what the tier lists are going to look like. Realistically, Warlock Stonks went really high. Rogue Stonks went really high. Death Knight Stonks went slightly down. It's not like you were nerfed to the ground. Mages and Hunters are looking very solid. Mages and Hunters are looking fucking great, right? And your one Boomkin and your one like Shadow Priest and your one or two DPS Shamans are looking great also. Warriors, good ones looking great, but like I literally watched a clip yesterday of Tetsu saying he wouldn't even Sunder on XT, and like if I was every other class DPSing that fight and my warrior wasn't Sundering XT but also not being top DPS, I would be fucking pissed. How close is combat to assassination? It is close. Like these aren't like a huge gap right here. It's just you should just bring more assassinations usually. You could bring like two you could bring two combats. You could bring more, especially if you can gear really easily. Get your like golden Serenite fucking weapon. If we look at like combat, you can get your golden Serenite dragon really easily. Then you don't have to like, but you're fighting over Blade Twister, Sag. But you have a lot more higher prio on Comet's Trail. Remember that. You have a lot higher prio on Comet's Trail. And remember guys, as I said at the beginning of this, everybody is gonna skip through it, take a screenshot, and mold about where their class is, unless they're a Warlock. Everyone's gonna screenshot it and mold about where their class is instead of listening to justifications. And there's a lot that goes into Ulduar in particular, a lot more than what went into phase 1, where phase 1 was loot pinatas, who can do the most DPS, very fast, very short fights. That's not necessarily the case anymore. A lot of classes have a lot more utility or a lot more niche situations where you'll see mages destroy, or where you'll see like even your Boomkin on like Hodier can do crazy. Again, also, this is an estimation of throughout the phase. So early on, Frost CK will be a lot higher than where it will sit later on in the phase. And all of these classes are like almost the same. These ones are better, and all of these are almost the same. And this, I mean, you could run Fury or Feral, who cares? Who cares? Fury Warriors, just wait your turn. You're gonna be fucking pumpers. There's gonna be fights, like again, there's gonna be fights where Alondo gets rank 1 world DPS as a Fury Warrior, for sure. Like world, over all other classes, he'll get rank 1 world. But your Fury Warrior in your group is gonna get shat on. Like just realistically, like your Fury Warrior in your group is probably gonna do such mediocre DPS that you're gonna be like, oh, that makes sense. So there you have it, guys. That's a tier list for phase 2.
No!
Enjoy molding if your class
God, please, no!
wasn't the highest. Thanks for watching the tier list, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments. Realistically, it's a tier list, so you probably very strongly disagree, but it's based off of all of the parameters I kind of talked about earlier, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Anyways, if you do want to support the channel, of course, make sure to like and subscribe to see more content on phase 2 and Ulduar coming soon, as well as if you feel like it, make sure to join the channel memberships. It does help out the channel, and again, you do get exclusive content there. There's exclusive videos. Some tips and tricks guides will be coming out there very soon, as well as a lot of videos will be coming out early there before they come out live on normal YouTube. See you all later, and have a good one.